All right, let's jump into some fascinating religious history.
Sounds good.
We're going to be looking at the evolution of the Orthodox Church in the 20th century.
Big topic.
It is a big topic. And
some controversy, too.
oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's going to be some controversy in here. And to help us kind of wade through all this, we're going to be focusing on a 1964 report that was presented to the Council of Bishops by Archbishop Averky.
This report is a real critique of what he saw as the decline of Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
Especially with the pressures of communism and this rising ecumenical movement.
And it's not just like some boring theological debate, you know?
No, not at all.
It gets really dramatic.
It does.
He talks about a secret catacomb church operating in Soviet Russia.
Right. So Archbishop Averky points to this catacomb church, and he's saying these are the true Orthodox Christians.
Wow.
And they completely reject the officially sanctioned Soviet church.
So basically they're saying that church is
totally compromised. Just a tool of the communist government. It's a question that goes straight to the heart of Averky's concerns.
Yeah.
And it gets even more complicated when you consider just how dramatically the Orthodox world changed during this period.
Yeah.
So in 1948, not that long before this report, the Russian Orthodox Church was really celebrating its autocephaly, its independence. Mm-hmm. And they were emphasizing this strict adherence to tradition.
Okay.
But then very quickly, there's this big push towards ecumenism.
Right, the idea of
uniting all these different Christian denominations.
Okay, so almost like they were trying to do both,
right.
Cling to tradition,
right.
But also reach out to other churches that they might have seen as rivals before.
Exactly. And then you have the Soviet government in the background, just making everything even more complicated.
Oh, yeah, that definitely adds another layer to this.
It does.
So who are some of the key players in this whole situation?
Well, a really important one is the Department for External Church Relations.
Okay.
Within the Moscow Patriarchate.
Gotcha.
And first, it was led by Metropolitan Nikolai Krutitsky.
Okay.
And then later by Metropolitan Nikodim.
Okay.
Who was much younger.
Gotcha.
And they were both very involved in what the church was doing on the world stage.
Okay.
But they also had these close ties to the Soviet government.
So you've got these church leaders who are getting this special treatment from the Soviet authorities.
Right.
But at the same time, everyday clergy, just normal people trying to practice their faith.
Yeah.
They're being persecuted.
Exactly.
Churches are shut down.
Persecuted.
Priests are arrested.
Yeah.
I mean, it's dangerous to be a Christian.
It is. It's a huge contrast.
Yeah.
And Averky does not let that slide.
Yeah, I bet.
He points to specific actions that the Moscow Patriarchate and some of its satellite churches took.
Okay.
Like in Romania and Bulgaria, where they actually started echoing Soviet propaganda.
Wow.
They condemned U.S. foreign policy.
Really?
Even like specific actions in Korea and Cuba.
So they're getting into these really politically charged issues.
Absolutely. Hot button topics.
Yeah, that on the surface have nothing to do with religion.
No, not really.
Sounds like they were really trying to serve two masters at the same time.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
God.
Right.
And the Communist Party.
That's a tough balancing act.
To say the least.
And this whole idea of serving God versus serving a political ideology, that's really at the heart of Averky's concerns about ecumenism.
Okay.
He sees it as a symptom of a much bigger problem, this trend of compromising Orthodox principles, whether it's for political reasons or just to try and fit in with the modern world.
Gotcha.
He even compares it to the Living Church movement in Russia. That emerged in the early days after the Bolsheviks, and they were trying to modernize the church.
So he sees kind of a parallel between the living church and what was happening in the free world with ecumenism.
Exactly.
Okay.
The Living Church ultimately failed to gain widespread support in Russia.
Right.
But it did lay the groundwork for the church to fall under the control of the Communist Party.
And that's what he's worried about.
That's what worried him.
Yeah, that the ecumenical movement was going to lead to the same kind of outcome.
Exactly, this watered-down, compromised version of Orthodoxy.
And this is why he was so critical of some of the reforms that were coming out of the 1923 Pan-Orthodox Congress.
Oh, yeah.
Like allowing married bishops.
Huge changes.
A second marriage for clergy, shorter services, and even changing to a new calendar.
These were radical ideas back then.
Yeah.
And a lot of people pushed back hard.
It's interesting how something like changing a calendar can cause such an uproar.
It is, but for a lot of people, it wasn't just about the calendar itself. It was about this idea of holding on to tradition,
right,
resisting what they saw as dangerous innovations.
They saw it as a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Averki points to a really powerful letter
He does.
from Metropolitan Anthony
Yes.
to Patriarch Constantine VI.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a scathing critique of all of these moves.
It is.
Towards what he calls anti-orthodox.
And even anti-church.
Yeah.
He really goes after patriarchs Meletius IV and Gregory VII,
Yeah.
accusing them of all sorts of things.
Okay, like what?
Consecrating a bishop for Finland improperly.
Wow.
Persecuting Orthodox believers in Finland.
Wow.
And forcing this new calendar through, even though it had been condemned by previous councils.
So the calendar seems to be a real sore spot for Averki.
It is. It represents this big tension between tradition and change within the Orthodox Church.
Yeah.
And he mentions that earlier councils used some really strong language against anyone who adopted the Gregorian calendar. And at the time he was writing, only a handful of Orthodox churches were still using the old calendar.
Right. It was really dwindling.
It was.
So that brings us to his kind of suspicion of the whole ecumenical movement.
Right.
It seems like he sees the involvement of Orthodox churches as a huge red flag.
Yeah, he's not buying this idea that they're just there to kind of bear witness to orthodoxy from within the movement.
And he's like, come on.
Right. He cites these resolutions from the Ecumenical Conference in New Delhi that called for this one single church
Oh, wow.
encompassing all Christian confessions.
Past, present, and future.
Past, present, and future. I mean, that's a pretty big leap.
Yeah, that's not just witnessing.
No, not at all.
And this is where Patriarch Athenagoras of Constantinople comes in.
Yes, he was a major figure in the Orthodox embrace of ecumenism.
And some of his statements are pretty shocking.
They are.
Like when he predicted the complete fusion of Christian churches in a new cosmogony.
That's pretty bold.
Yeah, that's a pretty big statement.
And his actions backed up his words. He was very welcoming of Pope John XXIII's call for an ecumenical council.
Right.
Exchanged representatives with the Vatican, and really downplayed any differences between Orthodoxy and Catholicism.
So even his protege Archbishop Jacob was talking about this unity that already existed in Christ and the need to move beyond these theological debates.
Which is totally opposed to Averki's whole worldview.
Right.
For him, these theological differences were fundamental to what it means to be Orthodox.
So how does he respond to this claim that ecumenism is all about uniting against communism?
He doesn't hold back at all.
What does he say?
He basically says, look at what's actually happening, these ecumenical conferences.
Yeah.
They hardly ever condemn a persecution of Christians in communist countries.
Wow.
And they even accepted the Moscow Patriarchate into the World Council of Chemists without even mentioning its ties to the Soviet government.
So it's like they were so focused on unity that they were willing to overlook these really serious issues.
That's exactly his point.
Yeah.
He sees it as this moral compromise, a real betrayal of true orthodoxy.
And this leads to what he calls the kiss of betrayal.
Yes.
The meeting between Patriarch Athenagoras and Pope Paul VI.
In Bethlehem.
On Orthodox Christmas Eve in 1963.
Oh, yeah, that meeting.
Yeah.
Huge symbolic significance.
So what happens?
These two leaders, they kiss, they embrace.
Wow.
It sent shockwaves through the Christian world.
Really?
And the location, the Garden of Gethsemane, just added this whole other layer of meaning.
Like Judas betraying Christ?
Exactly.
Talk about heavy symbolism.
Heavy symbolism.
And Averki's not holding back.
No.
In his interpretation.
Not at all. He sees this as orthodoxy surrendering to the papacy.
Wow.
Even though the Pope was reaffirming his own primacy at the same time.
And what's interesting is none of the other Eastern patriarchs seem to object to any of this.
No.
What does Averki say about that?
He sees their silence as complicity. He even points to the Moscow Patriarchate's own efforts to get closer to the Vatican.
Oh, wow.
As evidence that this whole thing might be orchestrated.
Like maybe even by the Soviets.
Maybe. It's possible.
Sounds like we're headed towards a pretty dark conclusion here.
Well, Averki's pretty clear.
Yeah.
He predicts a future where a catacomb church of true Orthodox Christians will be needed to resist what he sees as this compromised false orthodoxy.
That's a chilling prediction, especially considering everything else going on in the world at that time.
It is.
The Cold War.
Yeah.
Constant threat of nuclear war.
It's a scary time.
And to really drive home his point, he connects this back to the writings of the Russian Saint Theophan, the recluse, who predicted that outward Christianity would just be a mask for an inward abandonment of truth.
It's a powerful image.
It is. It's a lot to take in. What Averky's describing definitely had a big impact on the Orthodox world. And it continues to shape how people understand what it means to be Orthodox.
Even today.
Even today.
Absolutely.
It feels like we're just scratching the surface here.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It's important to remember that Averky's perspective is just one piece of this big, complicated puzzle.
Absolutely.
So how did other Orthodox leaders and thinkers respond to all of this?
Well, there were a lot of different responses.
Yeah.
They believed that the Orthodox Church already had the full truth.
Okay.
And that any attempt to unite with other denominations would just lead to compromise and water down that truth.
It's a pretty strong stance.
It is.
Were there any other voices out there that offered a different perspective?
Definitely. Some people acknowledged the challenges of communism and the ecumenical movement.
Right.
But they had a more nuanced view.
Okay, so what were they saying?
They argued that engaging with other Christian communities could actually be a really powerful way to bear witness to the truth of Orthodoxy.
So more of a missionary approach.
Exactly.
Okay.
But they also said, you got to stay true to Orthodox principles.
Gotcha.
Especially in a world that's changing so rapidly.
Right, because the world is changing.
The world is changing, and that's tough.
So how do they reconcile those two things?
Yeah, how do you...
Staying true to your principles,
right,
but also engaging with the world.
It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
They said that genuine ecumenism should be based on mutual respect and a willingness to learn from each other.
Gotcha.
But without giving up those core principles.
So it's about dialogue.
Dialogue.
Not about negotiating your differences away.
Right. Not about saying, oh, yeah, we're all the same.
Yeah.
It's about deepening your understanding and appreciating the richness of all these different traditions.
So not merging.
No.
But more like a respectful coexistence.
Right. Respectful coexistence.
And collaboration.
Exactly. They even argued that this kind of encounter, if it's done with humility and openness, could actually make Orthodox identity stronger.
How so?
Well, it would force Orthodox Christians to really articulate their beliefs clearly and engage with different points of view. Okay, what about some of the specific issues he raises?
Yeah.
Like those reforms from the 1923...
The Pan-Orthodox Congress?
Yeah, the Pan-Orthodox Congress.
Did they actually happen?
Yeah, were those implemented?
It's a mixed bag.
Okay.
Some of the more radical ideas, like married bishops and second marriages for clergy.
Yeah.
Most Orthodox churches just rejected those.
Okay.
But others, like adopting a new calendar, some churches actually did that. And that's what led to the whole calendar controversy.
That's what led to the calendar controversy.
And those schisms.
Yeah.
It's amazing how a calendar can be so divisive.
It is, but it goes back to that tension
Right.
between tradition and change.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, the calendar, it wasn't just a way to measure time. It represented this connection to the ancient church.
A continuity.
A continuity of practice that they felt was essential.
For preserving that Orthodox identity.
For preserving their identity.
So changing the calendar wasn't just a practical change.
It was a symbolic
break.
A break with the past.
It was a break with the past. And a lot of people who opposed the new calendar.
Right.
They worried that it would lead to more innovations.
Right.
And this erosion of Orthodox tradition.
It's that slippery slope.
That slippery slope.
Yeah.
They were afraid it would become this more liberal, westernized version of Orthodoxy. Yeah, one that's more acceptable to the modern world.
Right. But maybe it loses its soul.
It loses its distinct character.
Loses its distinct character. And it's important to remember that these weren't just abstract theological arguments.
Right.
This had real consequences for Orthodox Christians.
Yeah, people's lives.
People's lives, the calendar controversy caused divisions in families, communities, even within individuals.
How did this calendar thing actually play out in the end?
Well, believe it or not,
Yeah.
it's still an issue today
Really?
in some parts of the Orthodox world.
Wow.
Some churches adopted the new calendar, others kept the old one, and some even use this hybrid system where they celebrate some feasts according to the new calendar, and others according to the old one.
Wow.
So against that new calendar,
Yeah.
but he really emphasized sticking to tradition.
Right. Okay, so we've covered a lot.
We have.
Communism, ecumenism.
It's a lot.
But Averky's prophecy about the catacomb church.
Yeah.
That's still hanging over everything.
It is.
It's a pretty unsettling prophecy.
It is.
Especially with the Cold War going on.
Yeah.
And the threat of nuclear war.
And you can't forget about the religious persecution that was happening inside the Soviet Union.
Right. This wasn't just an idea for people.
No, it was real.
They would live in it.
They had to practice their faith in secret.
Yeah.
To avoid being arrested.
Or worse.
Exactly.
And it sounds like Verke's saying that this could be the future for all Orthodox Christians.
It's not just about communist countries.
He's worried about these compromises.
Yeah.
He sees happening with ecumenism.
And the push to modernize.
Yeah, he thinks it could actually split the church.
Like there could be two Orthodox churches.
Wow.
One that's official and institutional.
Yeah.
But maybe too willing to change its principles.
Right, just to fit in.
To fit in.
And then another one that's forced underground.
Yeah.
More resistant.
Holding on to what they see as the true orthodoxy.